welcome everybody to Book Passage Live. We're here tonight to celebrate Such a Quiet Place by Megan Miranda. It's a thrilling suspense novel, and I'm so excited to have everyone here today to hear about this. And just before we get started, I want to let everyone know a few things. We will have a Q&A portion towards the end, so if you have any questions for our authors today, please put that in the YouTube chat, and we will relay it to our speakers. And also there will be links in the YouTube chat to buy the book. So if you feel so inclined, we hope you will, and we hope you will buy it from Book Passage or any independent bookstore. And as well, if you like the event and if you like the video, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our upcoming events. And now about our authors today. We have here today Megan Miranda. And Megan Miranda is the author of the New York Times best-selling All the Missing Girls, The Perfect Stranger, and The Last House Guest, which was Reese Witherspoon's book club pick, as well as Girl from Widow Hills. She's also written several books for young adults, including Come Find Me, Fragments of the Lost, and The Safest Lies. She grew up in New Jersey, graduated from MIT, and she currently lives in North Carolina. You can follow Megan Miranda at Megan L. Miranda on Twitter and Instagram, author Megan Miranda on Facebook, and you can visit her website at www.meganmiranda.com. And in conversation with Megan tonight is Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today best-selling author of 13 novels of suspense. She's also won multiple awards for her crime fiction, including 5 Agathas, 4 Anthonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She's also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV and has won 37 Emmys. 37 Emmys? That's so impressive. 14 Edward R. Murrow Awards and dozens of other honors for her groundbreaking journalism. The National Book Reviews called Hank a master at crafting suspenseful mysteries and a superb and gifted storyteller. Her novels have been named Best Thrillers of the Year by Library Journal, New York Post, Book Club, Pop Sugar, Real Simple Magazine, and others. And her 2019 book is the acclaimed legal thriller The Murder List, which won the Anthony Award for the Best Novel of the Year. And her newest book, The First to Lie, is a chilling psychological standalone, which garnered a starred review from Publishers Weekly and is now nominated for the Anthony Award for Best Novel, as well as the iconic Mary Higgins Clark Award. And Her Perfect Life, which is coming in September, is already receiving starred reviews from Kirkus and Publisher Weekly. Thank you both so much for being here today, and I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Thank you so much. I wish I had snapped a screenshot of Megan holding up my book. That would be a treasure. Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here tonight with you all, with Megan Miranda, who, Megan, I have been a fan of yours from day one, book one, moment one. And I remember when we met a couple of years ago at the Decatur Book Festival, how excited I was to meet you and what a journey it has been for you. Such a Quiet Place is absolutely fantastic. It is a page turner. It is riveting. It is smart. It is suspenseful. No wonder everyone loves it. Congratulations on this fantastic book.
Thank you so much. And I'm so thrilled to be here chatting with you today. You know, the feeling is completely mutual. I was so excited to meet you at the Decatur Book Festival. I've been a fan for so long, and I'm so excited for your new book coming out soon as well.
Thank you. I remember that Henry Winkler was at that book festival. Remember that? I think all the authors were lined up, and then the line for the Fonz was sort of out the door. One of those things. It was quite adorable. I do want to talk about your book. One of the difficulties of talking about a suspenseful thriller like this is that you just really can't talk about the book. But I will start by saying it takes place in a town called Hollow's Edge, which is so perfect. And after that, it stars 2 women and a neighborhood.
Yeah.
How much are you willing to tell us all about it after that?
Yeah, so it's so hard to kind of talk about any suspense or thriller because you think, okay, how far should I go into the story without revealing too much? But I think that's a perfect kind of starting place. It's set in this really close-knit, idyllic neighborhood called Hollow's Edge, and it's a very small lakeside neighborhood, the type of place where everyone believes they know everything about one another. And of course, this isn't true. And about a year and a half earlier, the foundation of this neighborhood was really shattered by this horrific crime that happened. And the neighbors of the main character named Harper were found killed. And the neighbors all worked together to piece together their security footage and their doorbell cameras, which led to the conviction of one of their neighbors named Ruby. And she is the main character's roommate. So Ruby was convicted a year and a half earlier. But the book begins just as Ruby's conviction is overturned, and she comes right back to Hollow's Edge, right back into this house that she shared with Harper, and it just shakes everyone up again. And there's really no good answer here. No one's really sure if she's innocent or guilty. If she's guilty, then there's a killer back in the neighborhood. And if she's truly innocent, then presumably a killer has been there all along. So it just brings everything back to the surface.
It's such a chilling premise. So it's such a good idea. And I want to read just the first line, because the first line is such a microcosm of the book. The first line is, "There was no party the day Ruby Fletcher came home." I mean, that is just as ominous and chilling and so portentous of what's going to happen next. And it's the whole book is in that line, because that's the domino, isn't it? That starts what happens, starts the book.
It is. And I love that you read that line because, and this is a very rare, this does not usually happen, but when I was pitching this idea, and it was sort of, very loose idea, and it was kind of the merging of this neighborhood idea and like the aftermath of a crime. And I think I said in the pitch, and the book would begin with something like, "There was no party the day Ruby Fletcher came home." And it actually kind of became the first line of the book and stayed that way through all of the edits. But it was sort of almost the feeling that kicked off the entire idea, was like, what happens to this place when, like, also what kind of person who was convicted by all of the neighbors who kind of all testified in her trial, what kind of person comes back to that neighborhood? And then how do they receive her, and where does it go from there?
Well, I want to unpack all of that because there's so much to talk about in the most careful of ways. But let me also just bring up the title. Yeah. I've been a reporter for 43 years, I have to say. And I cannot tell you how many times at a crime scene, someone has said to me, "It was such a quiet place. It's such a quiet place." And that's so much undercurrent. That's the iceberg of this quiet place, because clearly it's not a quiet place.
Right.
Was it always the title, and does it give you chills as much as it gives me?
So I will say my titles are usually a process to come by. It was early on in the process. Sometimes I turn in a book and it's like, book 4, we'll figure out the title later. This one, I had started by calling the neighborhood's name. So my very first draft when I started was called Hollow's Edge, because I knew it was going to be this close-knit neighborhood, and that was really the heart of the story. And then I think I started thinking about, there was a line in the story where it said it was such a quiet neighborhood, just like you said, people talking about it. It was such a quiet neighborhood, and that became the working title. And then it kind of morphed to Such a Quiet Street, Such a Quiet Place, and we settled on Such a Quiet Place, which I feel like just captures the tone. And like you were saying, what you would say about what we thought, like the facade of a place, until you're kind of unraveling what lies beneath.
Plus, also, neighborhood would never fit. Never fit. Things that you have to think about.
Spelling it wrong too.
Oh, exactly. So let's go back to what you said about suburbia, though. There's this sort of the idea that the neighbors work together to convict Ruby. So she knows that they did this, and she comes back. Then the trial isn't fair, so the conviction is overturned. And then she comes back. Ruby comes back. What an audacious thing for a character to do, for a person to do. And how much doesn't that tell us so much about who she is?
I think it does. I think, Ruby was also she was always this type of person who was willing to kind of push buttons and to see, she never really went along with this facade in the neighborhood. And so I think in a way that was also why when somebody saw her on the security footage, they were very quick to point out Ruby. Like, of course, Ruby would be the one to do this. And everyone kind of agreed, and that evidence, kind of they all found this evidence that supported that theory. And that's also what makes her the type of person to come back, who was like, I think the main character doesn't know, is she here because she's trying to prove her innocence? Is she here for revenge? Is she here just to taunt us? And since it's not told from Ruby's point of view, nobody really knows.
And I wonder if I marked this place. There's something that you have someone say. Oh, I can't find it. I have so many markers in here. You'll notice that they're near the front, so I don't give, except for this one, so I don't give anything away. But you do have Harper say something like, you never know what Ruby really means when she says something.
Yes.
And forgive me for mangling your line, but it's very clear that Harper, the main character, one of the main characters, knows that Ruby has an attitude and that she has an agenda. It's just that she doesn't know what it is.
No one knows what it is. And no one in this neighborhood really wants to ask. No one wants to, I think they're all in this position of being happy there was a suspect that was not them, because if it's not Ruby, this is a little bit of a locked box mystery. There are cameras in and out of the neighborhood. And so if it's not Ruby, it's one of them. And that's kind of the dilemma they're all facing.
So, and that is another thing that Ruby knows that they know, that it's either Ruby and she's a murderer, or it isn't, and somebody else is out there. And I think that the other thing, that's another one of the many things that's so fabulous about this is, here's this such a quiet place neighborhood, an academic neighborhood, and we can talk about that also in a minute. But these neighbors got together like a posse, like a vigilante justice, and met together and figured this out in order to get her, in order to see who was guilty, but essentially to get her convicted. The idea that this microcosm, this locked box of a neighborhood, gets together for something so sinister that they think is good.
Yes.
Talk about that, writing that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's something I'm really interested in exploring thematically in a lot of different ways is, these, not only their settings, their premises, their technology that are seen as for good at the start. Mm-hmm. And, it's not always that way. When something goes terribly wrong, what these people saw as safety suddenly isn't. And they had this message board at the start that they saw as a way of helping one another, a way of getting information, a way of keeping themselves safe in a way. And how that's used is not only always for that purpose. And so it was really kind of an interesting way to explore these different dynamics of what we view as safety. And this neighborhood was always seen as a safe place. There's a police officer who lives on the street. They watch out for one another. They can see into each other's homes, or they can hear what each other is saying. But in the wrong hands, what's really possible here?
And also because when there's surveillance, you think you're seeing the truth because it's there on video and you see what you see. But that's just that moment in time, and you don't know why someone was there, and you don't know what the reasons behind that person being there, and you don't know who wasn't, who was somewhere else at the time. And you can, and even in a message board, and we'll talk about that too, because that's such a great part of this book. People are talking, and I'm thinking about this, sharing information and reinforcing what each other thinks. Like, oh, I saw that too. Oh, I've always thought that. Yes, you're right. Yes, we're right. And this cauldron starts bubbling of, I think, I was trying to think, someone said this, and the reason I'm stumbling here is that it might have been me. It might have been a character I had in a book say this, but so that'd be silly. But so I'm quoting a fictional character that I wrote, is detective said, you find what you are looking for. You find what you are looking for. And that's what these people do.
I think that's such a truth. That's really universal. And especially when, I think a lot about perspectives when we write, and what's your first instinct of a belief. And when you believe that, does everything that you see after that support that theory? I think at one point you have a theory in mind and you're only looking at things that support that theory, and everything. So if you're told, look for this, that's what you're going to find. Exactly. And it's really something I think, fascinating to dig into more. And then when one thing changes or you change that perspective, how do those pieces look differently?
And depending on whether your perspective is someone who's being suspicious of someone. So when you are suspicious of someone, as everyone, especially Harper, is of Ruby who comes home, everything that Ruby says and everything that everyone says is filtered through that suspicious filter, and that you see it that way. And that's, you write psychological thrillers, and Such a Quiet Place is such a wonderful psychological thriller, available from Book Passage right now, by the way. It's such a wonderful psychological thriller, but it's all about what people think the other person meant, or wonder if the other person isn't saying, and as a result, the misperceptions, and then as a result, the incorrect actions can be devastating.
Yeah, and I think that's something else I was exploring just in general in this book, was how no one in this book really talks face to face or just asks those questions directly. It's the facade on top, and they talk on the message board, and you can kind of read things in like passive aggressive tones, but they never really just come out and ask one another questions.
I love the message board. And again, I'm just going to put that in another segment because I really want to delve into that. But going back to the sort of posse, vigilante, the Ruby coming home, the real tension of, there's so many triangles in this book, and there's so many elements of tension in this book. The conflict between Harper, the main character, and Ruby who comes home, the conflict between Harper and the neighbors, what is she doing and what are they doing, and are they working together or are they not working together? The conflict between right and wrong, and law and justice, and whether you're an insider or an outsider, and can you cross that line? I mean, there's some big concepts. I mean, it's a fast-paced, entertaining page turner, no question about that. I could not put it down. But it's, what is justice and what is truth and what is right is really beautifully explored here.
Thank you. And when I start writing, I usually start with premise and character before plot. And it usually is very thematic. Like there's themes I'm interested in exploring. And that was really one of them. And this idea of justice, and also this idea of groupthink and wanting to be an insider. And, the neighborhood already had lines of what made somebody an insider and what didn't. Ruby was seen as an outsider from the start, in a way, even though she was living with Harper. And so I think, there's a lot of tension throughout. I try to think about the tension between characters, but also the tension in setting and the tension in themes and what a character is afraid of. And a lot of times, like for Harper, she's in a very difficult position because she's not only having to deal with this person she doesn't know whether she's innocent or guilty, but the rest of her neighborhood wants her to do a certain thing. I mean, they want her to have Ruby gone. And for her, it's that tension of what is right, what is just, and what role did we all play in where we are right now. And it's something that every character has to kind of come face to face with individually, I think. There's sort of like how things look as a group when you piece everything together, and then everyone's individual actions.
And I think it's so thought-provoking when you read Such a Quiet Place, which I hope you will. And if you're just joining us, we're talking about Such a Quiet Place, this fabulous new psychological thriller by bestseller Megan Miranda. I do think it's really thought-provoking because, and leave a question in the chat. We will get to the Q&A, so I know you have questions that you want to ask Megan as well. I was saying it was thought-provoking because it does make you wonder what you would do if this happened. And that's one of the things that draws you into the book so much, is bringing up that question of what's good, what does good mean, what does justice mean, what does truth mean, what's the best thing to do. Let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit about Harper and Ruby, because they're unlikely roommates. They shared a house, and now they are again unlikely roommates. I think it's okay to talk a little bit about how the two of them got together.
Yeah, definitely. So Harper used to share her house with her fiance. And I should start by saying that one of the things about this neighborhood that is interesting is that not only do they live together in this very close-knit neighborhood, but so many of them also work together.
Yes.
There's not a lot of industries to commute to, and most everyone in this area is there to work at the college. And if not the college, they're part of one of the other schools nearby. So a lot of them are home for the summer right now. And I was really interested in telling this story of people who see these multiple layers of one another. You come home from work and you're still, you can't really take off your work persona and become somebody else. People are seeing all the sides of one another. It's kind of inescapable. So Harper's fiance had been in grad school, and Harper worked in admissions. But as soon as her fiance finished grad school, he left her with this house in her name. And at the same time, Ruby's dad, now Ruby had gone to college and Ruby's dad retired and moved away, but Ruby wanted to stay in the area. She wanted to stay in this neighborhood, and she saw this as an opportunity that Harper was kind of left in a lurch as well. And she said to Harper, let me move in, I can help with the rent. And that's how they became roommates. And I think Harper always saw her as sort of a little sister. She saw her as a teenager going through college, and she does kind of feel like a sense of responsibility towards her, but not anymore. Yeah.
Well, but sort of she does. I mean, what if the neighbors were wrong? And what if and she really, I mean, some things happened in the house that are sad and touching that Harper looks back on and thinks, oh, I wonder if I should have done that. And she feels that she needs to make up for the possibility that possibly everybody has been tragically wrong,
right?
And including herself. You know, when the courts say that the trial wasn't fair,
right,
and that's what our legal system, that's why it works, is that if the trial isn't fair, a conviction may be overturned. It doesn't mean the person didn't do it.
Right.
It just means something went wrong in the trial, and that little niggling undercurrent is there throughout.
Yes, it is. And the people who were involved in that trial, which was deemed unfair, are also the people in this neighborhood. And so they're all kind of tied up together. They're all really bound by their role in this initial trial. And like you said, just because the trial wasn't done fairly does not mean she's innocent. And that's what they're sort of grappling with is once they've made up their minds and they don't believe she's innocent, they still kind of, the evidence still is pointing towards Ruby.
And the cool thing that you've done with this town, many cool things, but the cool thing is people can't leave for a couple of reasons. One, because someone was murdered there and the housing values have gone down. And also they're bound together by their occupations. And that, again, is a wonderful way of creating this microcosm. And I see that Deb Reed is asking, is the neighborhood in the novel based on a real neighborhood? So that's interesting. It's a college town and this is the part of a college town where the people who are involved in academia live. How did that evolve in your story, and how does that affect what people do and why they do it?
Yeah, so first to answer Deb's question, which I love, it's not based on a real neighborhood. And I feel like I always have to give the disclaimer, my neighborhood is lovely and my neighbors are lovely. It's not based on anywhere I've lived. But it's, thinking about something I'm really interested in a lot of my books before too. The Last House Guest, it takes place in a vacation town, and thinking about what happens when the people who come every summer leave. And I think in a way, this was almost a step in that same direction, because during the year, this is a very different type of place. It's full of college students. They have these kind of legends and traditions that they all take part in. And the whole town kind of functions around this college. And I was starting to think about, what is this place like in the summer after the students leave and some people are home and are able to enjoy some of that time off. And the book takes place during 11-day span right around July 4th. But it is a type of place that draws people in almost for the same reason. They're all drawn to this type of life. They're able to, it's not like this very, very upscale place, but they
Yeah.
feel they have the best of both worlds. They have this lake that's right there. They can do these activities. They have nature. Like you step across the road and suddenly you're in the woods. And so for them, it feels like this slice of suburbia and also this access to wonderful elements of nature. But suddenly you start to see like all of the hidden things that hide under the surface here. And
also the hierarchy of the people who work in the same college, the hierarchy of those people doesn't go away during the summer when they're no longer, the professor or the cleaning person or the admissions officer or all the people or the cop on the street. They all have their roles during the school year, and they keep those no matter when it is.
And one of the added tension dynamics, I think, is also that Harper worked in the admissions department, which is where her neighbor was her boss, and he's the one who died. And so it's not just that their neighborhood is shaken up by this, it's also their entire place of work. And you're right, everyone has a role and there's a hierarchy, and any rumors that happen at school follow them back home.
And interesting too that these people are intelligent. These are the intelligentsia, a lot of them, who make a living thinking.
Yeah.
And so it's logical for them to try to solve a puzzle and to make everything work, to control things just like they do in school. They can control what happens, to control their lives in a way. And as a result, they're throwing someone under the bus, maybe or not, or maybe they're brilliant or not, and we don't know, but they think they're doing the right thing. Let me introduce to the readers. And again, we're talking about Such a Quiet Place by Megan Miranda, and we're taking questions in the chat. Thank you for that. We will get to all of them, and you can buy this right now. Well, not right now, when we're done from Book Passage, but you have one of the terrific elements that you use in this book, and I marked it, but now I can't find the page, is you start with hold on, I'm getting there. Ladies and gentlemen, just talk among yourselves while Hank finds the page. You start with, thank you, Hank, the community newsletter. And this is how people, the Hollow's Edge community page, the subject is, the first page, can I read this? Is this okay? It says, subject, she's back. And Tate Cora says, there's a cab outside the house. Did anyone know she was coming back here? And Preston Seaver says, what? Two question marks. Are you sure it's her? I'm watching out my window. It's her. It's definitely her. And Charlotte says, delete this now. And this is like, oh my golly, the tension, and something bad, or these people think that something bad has happened. Something is threatening them again. And you put the message board throughout. How did you decide to use that as a structure element? It's so wonderful.
Thank you. I came up with it pretty quickly when I started writing the book. I really think about structure when I'm starting, and the right way to tell a story, and the right way you can present information that maybe you're not getting from the main character's perspective. And the majority of the book is told from Harper's point of view, but in a way, I feel like the neighborhood is the main character as well. And so I decided I was going to put the day's worth of message boards at the start of each day. And it started as a way to give you another layer of what each of their personalities might be like, things they wouldn't say face to face, but you can kind of sense that in the message boards. But it also became a way to almost highlight things that were to come, that you knew were coming later on. So they might not be talking about this 4th of July party within their everyday interactions, but they're planning it on their message board. And they're planning it back to back. So, on one day it's who's bringing what to the 4th of July party. And also right below, it's like sign up for the neighborhood watch to make sure we're keeping an eye on Ruby and everything that's going on. So it was a way to show the different dynamics in this neighborhood, like the facade and also what was hidden below.
And as an author, you can use it to sort of shorthand for the reader what's going to happen without talking.
Yeah.
You're having long dialogues. You just, and it's such an inside thing because we really, when we read the message boards, we think, oh, this is the real thing. This isn't what people, we're getting the inside of the neighborhood. And the other thing that I loved about the message board, Harper explains it. She says, as soon as someone saw her, it would be on the message board if it wasn't already. And now she tells, when you purchased a home in Hollow's Edge neighborhood, you automatically became a member of the Hollow's Edge Owners Association, an official self-run group with an elected board that decided on our budget, collected our dues, and made and enforced the rules. Made and enforced the rules. And that, Megan, that is sinister.
It is. It is. And I feel like that's something that really says so much about just not just here, but like so many different levels. Like we come up with the rules. And then, you know, in this neighborhood, it's sort of a microcosm of this is how we're going to behave. These are the things that are allowed, but who's deciding that? And then they're basically selecting themselves as judge and jury as well, to enforce it.
And don't you dare break the rules.
Yes.
Don't you dare break the rules or else we will all turn. I mean, that is such a primal, gothic, visceral, you know, it's like the villagers with a pitchfork and the torches coming after someone in a very contemporary way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's, you know, I was thinking about it because like, I think about like things that seem like things people would agree to do, that seem like, yes, we all want to do this for our neighborhood's benefit, but it is sort of a bit like groupthink. And what if somebody doesn't want to do it? And then who's in charge of saying, well, that's not how we do things here? And it can turn very sinister very quickly.
I loved seeing the world through Harper's point of view as well, when as she was trying to figure out whether Ruby was in danger, whether someone else was in danger, whether she was in danger, whether no one was in danger, whether her neighbors were a hardworking group of wonderful people, or you know, a vigilante mob who was going to ruin everything. And how does she know? And we love Harper. We really like her from moment one. What was it like to write her?
Well, I started writing without knowing like those answers. I like diving in and not knowing because I write first person, and I feel like if I don't know and my main character doesn't know, then I can really channel that tension and uncertainty where she's not sure. And so the first part of the book when I was writing was really exploring those different angles. And I feel like so much of suspense or thrillers or any book or any setting is really about our emotion that we're filtering the perspective through. And if Harper is afraid, then suddenly everything is a potential for danger. And I think that's how the neighborhood shifts as well, because at first they thought they had put the danger behind them. And now everyone is seeing things through this perspective of fear, not only about, you know, maybe what Ruby did, but also their own role in that and what they do when they're afraid and how they view things when they're afraid, and the tension you see in every relationship that way.
Well, and there's nothing as, I don't want to say there's nothing as destructive as, but there are few things as destructive as guilt. And human nature, we don't want to be guilty. We want to be right. And so you do everything to make yourself be right so that you're not guilty anymore. I mean, this book is about aftermath to me. You know, this is something happened that seemed like it was the biggest thing that could possibly happen in a community. And it feels like it's over. It feels like it's solved. But now, you know, here's the stuff you didn't know. Here's the stuff nobody could have predicted. And that's another thing that's so wonderful. I'll show it one more time. Well, maybe several. But Such a Quiet Place, that feeling of you have plumbed into a part of the story that we don't usually see.
It was one of the inspirations for the idea, honestly, was I'd been thinking about telling a story set in a neighborhood for a while. I love small town settings. I love these places where you think you know everything about one another, and then something kind of shakes that up. And so for a long time, I'd been thinking about, I wonder if I could pull those boundaries even tighter and set it in a neighborhood. but I didn't feel like I had the story aha for it. And it was really what you were talking about. I'm somebody, I love suspense. I love watching documentaries, and when you reach the end where it feels like there's a resolution, I would always find myself wondering, like, I wonder what happens next. Because, like, what happened to these people who were involved or suspected, and were exonerated or not? And how does everyone's lives go on from there? And that sort of triggered the idea for this story. It is, like you said, a story in aftermath. The crime has been done, the person's been convicted, or is it, and then everything is aftermath. Where do you go from here?
It's like watching, well, if you could easily, nothing about writing books is easy, but a person could have decided to write about what happened to Ruby and then end the book with her being convicted, and everybody would said, "Ooh, cool, standalone, good book." But you decided to take this other route. Did it make you look at, when you watch Law and Order, I don't know, whatever, or Serial, or listen to Serial, or whatever crime shows, do you think about what happened after that?
I do. I think writing this story has definitely made me think about that too. But it is something I think about because I think we're very drawn to the closure of a story and that idea of a resolution. And the people in this neighborhood are very drawn to wanting a resolution and like you said, kind of believing they could solve it, that they were the ones who could solve this by the pieces of evidence they had. And what if that's not true? And what does that say about our sense of safety if those things aren't true? And yeah, I definitely think a lot of times the end of a story is the beginning of something new. And where does the story go from here?
That is a wonderful quote that I'm going to put somewhere. The end of a story is the beginning of something new, and that is so wise. And Alessandra is asking an interesting question because we were talking about what Harper would be afraid of, and Alessandra is saying, what would Ruby be afraid of? What would Ruby find scary? Which is a good question.
That is a really good question, because in a way, I think the things Ruby was afraid of have happened to her. I think, Ruby was afraid. I think she didn't think she could be disbelieved like that. Or I think she was in shock that she was convicted. And so I think the fact that she got through one of her bigger fears of not being the one in control, because I think Ruby is somebody who is a very big personality and likes to control things, and suddenly found herself in the opposite situation, completely with no control in her verdict and in her life. I think it makes her feel very powerful, actually, when she comes out, because she's been through that. And I think that of a lot of characters who've been through something they've been afraid of, is they come out stronger. And Ruby definitely comes back feeling pretty strong.
Well, she comes back and says, surprise, on page 1, I'm back. And that is, that's taking control, and that's power. And she swaggers throughout, and she does things to people that, she's doing it out of her, personal revenge. Like, you did this to me, and I just feel that I can do anything to you. But of course, that's going to be suspicious. And I want you all to know that if I look over here, I'm not looking out of the room. I'm looking at the comments. One of the other things, and one of the questions, this is great from Terry. We were talking about this as sort of a locked box kind of mystery with the town being surveilled and connected in so many ways. And you hit it out of the ballpark with this. And now I'm turning the pages of your book again to find, at the beginning of the book, you have this amazing map, which is, I referred to it all the time in reading the book. And I wonder, did this come after, did this come after you wrote it or before you wrote it?
So, okay, I love this question, and the answer is both. So when I was working on this book, I don't do a lot of plotting up front, but one of the first things I did was map out this street, because something that's so important is who would have what evidence, like whose camera is seeing what the night of the crime. And in the first chapter, as Ruby's walking down the street, Harper is kind of pinpointing, this house had this piece of evidence, this house saw her do this. And so I turned this book in, my first draft, and my editor said, did you draw a map for this? I feel like you have a map. And I said, oh yeah. And she said, this would be a really great thing that we could try to incorporate. Like, let's think how this could be a part of the book. And I will say my map at the time was like the size of this Post-it. And it was like, circles for houses, a word that said trees, a word that said lake and pool. And they've turned it into something beautiful that I love. But when I went into my second draft, I was thinking how the neighborhood would use this map as well. And in my mind, it became the piece of evidence that they used at the trial to kind of show the people in the jury, or that the police officer would present and say, this is where each person lived, and this was their piece of evidence. So it was something I had drawn out very loosely beforehand, but it became something much bigger when I kind of was getting into the later drafts.
And this is the palpable picture of who could see what and who was where. And also, sort of each house has such a different group of people inside. Yeah. So even the houses, the individual houses, are almost characters.
They are. And I tried to, it was helpful for me as I was writing too, because a lot of my previous books, it's been a character alone in a house that's pretty set far from everyone else. And in this book, it felt different because every scene, all of a sudden, there's people everywhere. You walk down the street and everyone can be out there. And so it was helpful for me to kind of think of the personality of each house. And we have the house where the two brothers live, and they call it the frat house, even though they're very neat and nothing like a frat. And so it was kind of fun to think about the dynamics of each household, and that they each kind of had their own personality too.
How did you keep track of all that besides the map? I know in writing, people ask me how I keep track of things, and I say, well, it just is real. So I don't need to keep track of it. I mean, this guy is this person, and this person is this person, and they live here. But this is, you wove this complicated story of the surveillance and the message board, and who knew what, and what some person meant, and where they really were, and all those kinds of things that I'm not going to be very specific about. Did you keep track somehow of who everyone was?
I did. I had a notebook with kind of, each character and what they saw, and maybe things they didn't want people to know. And I did kind of map out, what would have happened and what pieces of evidence you're seeing at each time. So yeah, I have notebooks. I start with notebooks before I go to my laptop, and I use my notebooks throughout the process to keep notes. But like you said, at some point they do feel real. And it was almost like I was conducting an investigation of my own as I'm, figuring out, okay, what does each house know? What piece of evidence? What are they not saying? So those are kind of fun things to uncover throughout the process.
And when you make a map like that, it's interesting how you don't think you need it, but then when you see it, you think, oh, they couldn't have seen that, or right, that's too far away, or it wouldn't have taken them that long to get there. It's too close. And so the reality of the neighborhood just sort of blossoms when it becomes a real place.
Yeah, it did. It kind of grew into this real thing, and also thinking about, well, surely some people might know there's cameras, and if you know there's cameras, where do you walk? So it was really thinking about it. Became even, I feel like it added even more depth, because if you knew where everything was, what did you do?
Exactly. You could use it or avoid it.
Right.
Use it or avoid it. And that, game playing is so wonderfully used in this book. Terry is asking, have you been a fan of and influenced by classic British authors? Which, of course, when we think of, the little community right out of Agatha Christie, where everybody knows each other, and as you said at the beginning of the event, thinks they know each other and thinks they know all about each other, and they may or they may not. Did you grow up on Agatha Christie?
I grew up on suspense in general. My mom was a huge mystery suspense reader, and I love mysteries and suspense. I was always drawn to these puzzles. And also, like, I I was someone growing up who was afraid of so many things, but I was drawn to these very, mysterious murder mystery type books. And I think it was like, I love the idea of the narrator, the characters making it through something. But yes, like I had so much joy. I had a few professional reviews that referenced that said it felt like a contemporary Agatha Christie type setup. And it felt like such a great honor. Yeah.
Isn't that so nice? And it is fun because do you look at your own neighborhood differently now? I know it's lovely, as you said, and nobody's gotten killed in your neighborhood and it's all fine. But has it taught you to be, I don't want to say this, but has it taught you to be suspicious, or were you already suspicious?
It's made me think more as a person walking down the street, where suddenly I'm wondering what's catching me and what are they seeing? Like, if I'm just walking down the street, it was just an interesting way. I hadn't really been thinking about that. And now it's something, as I was writing this book, that I was thinking about, like, what types of doorbell cameras, like this, you see like snippets of people's lives, but you're only seeing a snippet of it. And what story do you imagine kind of about them from that snippet in time?
And Agatha Christie didn't have cell phones and didn't have message boards and didn't have surveillance cameras. So you writing Agatha Christie from a contemporary point of view, you have a lot of other things that you have to deal with that, as you say, just in real life might be good and might be bad. But right. As the author, right? But as the author, you can put them in or take them out.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's so many of my previous books, which are set in the mountains or the woods, it's always like, well, the cell phones don't work. And it was almost like an absence of technology. And here I was kind of pulling the technology to try and use it, which is a different way that I had done things in the past. And it was interesting to think about because so many of these things in the neighborhood were done for safety reasons. And I felt like the theme became like how all of these things could also be used against you, that none of this was necessarily safe. Like, we engage in this technology, but it could also be used in a different way.
Exactly. I mean, Zach is asking, what do you think of Nextdoor and Ring doorbell technology in terms of the future of mystery suspense storytelling? I mean, don't you think it's like, we just used it in my book, What You See. It's all about surveillance and how what you see is what you see, but it's not the real thing.
It's not. I think it's the same kind of pitfalls of any eyewitness account, that you're seeing a moment in time and it's, in a context that maybe you're not seeing all the pieces of, but it feels like a piece of evidence. So I feel like it's that same pros and cons of it. But what's been interesting to me is when I was writing this book is thinking about how different or how quickly this technology has changed. I think about cases or books I read that were only like 10, 15 years old and how different a crime would be investigated now when there's Ring doorbells on all the neighbors' homes. And, so it was really interesting to think about that.
But it is your adversary is still, it's known. It's possible that there would be a Ring doorbell. So you're going to do right. Something else. One of my first books, I think it was Airtime, I had to revise it for a new edition. And one of the key elements of Airtime, which came out in, I think, 2010, was that people had beepers. And, how are you going to have a beeper, in 2020? That's just not going to happen. So I had to have somebody say, why do you still have, and I couldn't undo it. I mean, that was the plot, was beepers. Spoiler, sorry, you guys. So I had to have somebody say, why do you still have a beeper? And she says, my boss makes everyone have beepers. So fine, we solved the beeper problem. Yeah. So Zach, that's one of the ways of handling it. I also tell my students that when I teach writing a little bit, I say everybody gets in their life, not in their book, but in their life, one dead cell phone battery. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Yes. No, it's true. I feel like there's so much when the difference between my first book and this one of, I felt like well, cell phones were there, but they didn't have to be a big part of the plot. And now all of a sudden it's, well, why don't you just pick up your phone and call 911 at any given time? So it's like tricks you have to kind of work around.
Exactly. Usually, it used to be that somebody would say, "Why didn't you just call the police?" And now
Yeah.
you can just call 911, or they can, or they can see you. And
Yeah.
also, there's no reason not to know something because you can just Google it.
Yes.
So in my new book, for instance, I have somebody just say, "I just Googled you. While you were in the bathroom, I just Googled you."
Yeah.
And instead of hiding from it or trying to ignore it, you just embrace it, and then it's just as cool. It's just another cool thing. But we're running out of time, which is so crazy. But what I want to ask also is writing, this whole elaborate thing that this story that the neighborhood has concocted about what must have happened because it's on video, it must be true, and I saw this and it must be true, the whole eyewitness part of it. Then you as an author have to start undoing that. You have to start unraveling that. Is that a fun challenge? Or because your readers are smart, and they expect every single end to be tied up.
Yes. I really enjoy that part because it's something I'm fascinated by exploring is your perspective of something and what seems like truth, and then just shift your perspective a little bit, and how do all of those threads unravel? Or if someone else says something else, can you see it in a completely different light? So I'm fascinated by that, just even from a character perspective. And so that is, I think, one of the fun parts of writing a mystery is this is what the puzzle pieces look like they're creating, but can they all shift and create a different resolution as well? And to kind of think about how things can be viewed in two different ways.
I always think about if, obviously a mystery is like a puzzle, and the pieces of the puzzle go together, obviously. And I always think about in my books, I think about how can I show you, here's the puzzle pieces all put together. Now flip the puzzle over. What's on the other side? Now what does it look like? Now, and you think, oh, I never saw it that way. And I think I never saw it that way is such a hallmark of such a quiet place that you not only that the readers, that not only that the characters think they know something, but the readers think they know something. Yes. They pick a side and they pick a right and they pick a truth, and then you, clever Megan Miranda, says, watch this. Is that? It's got to be kind of, do you ever have days when you're sitting at your computer and you're thinking, this is kind of good, this is going to work? You're allowed to say so.
There's many days too where you're like, oh no, what have I done? Where am I ever going to get there? And then suddenly you find the aha. I love that analogy you said about flipping over the puzzle, and that's perfect way to explain it. I love that.
And I do want to ask Leslie's question, which is also very tantalizing. What led the author to focus on the suspicion? That suspicion, that toxic, destructive suspicion, is such a wonderful theme.
Oh, that's such a great question. I feel like I'm a suspicious person when I'm reading. Like I think it's the curiosity and like, I feel like questions are what fuel an idea. And when I was writing this neighborhood, I'm fascinated by this idea that there are mysteries inside every person. And that's really the heart of what you're unraveling. There's the mystery on the page, but then there's the mysteries inside people. And so much of that is fueled by suspicion. And that was a theme that kind of took on a life of their own, because what happens if we're only viewing things through an eye of suspicion? Kind of like we were talking about through an eye of fear, how that changes the way we view things. When you're suspicious, I think it changes the way you view all the dynamics too. And
then when you add motivation to that, and you add that someone has their own personal agenda and is able to use that to change someone else's belief, not because of truth, but because of what they want to be true. Or to be believed.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I feel like I could write, I'm so interested in that. I feel like I could keep writing that theme in different books and just exploring it in different ways.
But isn't that what suspense is? Isn't that what mysteries are? Isn't that what thrillers are? A search for a feeling of justice and a feeling that the good guys win and the bad guys get what's coming to them, and then sort of saying, but what is good? You know, and
Yeah.
what does that mean?
I feel like so many of us are exploring that in different ways, and that is sort of at the heart of so much of suspense. And I think it's what makes it resonate and makes them thought-provoking reads as well.
Well, you have just described such a quiet place, a truly thought-provoking, page-turning read, which I mean, I absolutely love this book, and I know all of you who are listening, and thank you so much for coming, will love this book too, available at Book Passage. I see Zach is back. Do we have any more questions, Zach? Anything else that you'd like to add for this evening? Megan, thank you. Congratulations on this wonderful book. It's really a triumph. And I loved watching you on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, just getting all the accolades and all the acclaim and all the people who love this book. So I am so honored to be part of this. Thank you for inviting me this evening.
Thank you so much. This has been such a highlight. I have been a fan for so long, and I can't wait for your new book to be out in stores. Thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation. And Zach and Book Passage, thank you so much for hosting. This has been incredible.
This has been great. And again, thank you, everybody. I was muted a second ago because I forgot to turn my YouTube mic off. But again, thank you, everyone. Please buy Such a Quiet Place. Buy it from Book Passage. Buy it from an independent bookstore. And thank you again so much, everyone, for being here. And I hope you love the book as much as we did. And thank you both so much for being here. And good night, everybody.
Good night.